Welcome you. Oh, there's the microphone. I love it when it really comes on. We're webcasting, so I'm a very loud speaker, but even I can't reach the web. My name is Jennifer Turner, and I direct the China Environment Forum here. I want to welcome you to the Wilson Center. If you're new, I'm thinking maybe most of you aren't, but it never hurts to remind you. We were created in 1968 by Congress as a memorial to Woodrow Wilson. We've got, in his spirit, we bring together government, NGO, business researchers in our lovely foreign policy forums. And I've been at the Wilson Center for 16 years now, putting on meetings, doing exchanges, putting out publications focused on, a lot of it hasn't been on Chinese energy issues, right? US-China clean energy cooperation, that climate stuff that's rather important to the world. Water's been a big part of our work. We've done a project called Choke Point China. Some of you are new maybe to my forum today. I know I have a lot of KICUS members. And so we've done a lot of work looking at the water, coal confrontations and trends in China. But every now and then, we also do food safety, but every now and then we're lucky, and I get to snag really smart people who look at the issue of illegal wildlife trade. And it's a topic that really, I always follow, and for a long time nothing was really happening except kind of bad trends. But this meeting today, that we're in some ways, I don't know if shadow is the right word, but kind of following, last year, the Presidents Obama and Xi came to an agreement that they were going to implement a near-complete bans on ivory imports, exports, and domestic and commercial trade. That's a big deal. And I know that the U.S. government, there's a strategic and economic dialogue in next week in China, and this issue of what's going to happen with the ivory trade is going to be on the agenda. So it's a great kind of new area, blooming area of cooperation between the U.S. and China. But so another reason why we're having this meeting is that we were lucky to grab Sharon Guinup to bring her on board as a fellow. She is a journalist and extraordinary storyteller who's been focusing and doing investigative research on illegal wildlife trafficking and the related criminal activity. There's a little bit of that, right, Sharon? And so when she came to the center, we immediately started brainstorming how we could get some new conversations going. In today's meeting, Wild Laws, China and its role in illicit wildlife trade, it's the first of what's going to be 3 meetings. We'll have a second meeting that's going to look at same issue in the Americas, and then also later, early fall, looking at the CITES agreement coming up. So I want to have Sharon, do you want to Sharon has a few things to say. She's the expert in this field. You going to come up here?
Absolutely.
All right. And then I'll introduce the other speakers who are sitting so quietly by here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I'd like to kick off our time together with an overview of this issue. Over the last few years, wildlife crime has grown into a global crisis. I'm sure you've seen the news that this week, 40 tiger cubs were found in a freezer in the Tiger Temple in Thailand. My reporting for National Geographic, in a story that runs today, also found that a monk was apprehended driving out of the temple with a car full of tiger products, skins, amulets, and tiger teeth. There's growing awareness that the illegal wildlife trade is run by international crime syndicates and helps to fund terrorist groups, including the Lord's Resistance Army. This $15 to $20 billion a year business is now the 4th largest source of criminal earnings in the world, after guns, drugs, and human trafficking operations. China is the top consumer of illegally traded species. In the past, wildlife parts and products were mostly used in traditional medicines, but the market has shifted along with China's expanding economy. While some wildlife products are still used as tonics or medicines, many have become luxury items for the country's most powerful and influential people. The result is that poachers are wiping out the world's most endangered and venerated animals, and in the process, impacting entire ecosystems. About 96 elephants fall victim to the illegal ivory trade each day in Africa. On the black market, rhino horn is worth more per pound than cocaine. It's erroneously believed to be an aphrodisiac that can also cure everything from cancer and headaches to the common cold. Rhino horn is made up primarily of keratin, the same protein found in our hair and fingernails, but demand for powdered horn killed 1,175 rhinos in South Africa last year alone. While the slaughter of rhinos and elephants in Africa has grabbed headlines, pangolins, snow leopards, turtles, tigers, and many other species are also being poached and traded to near extinction. More tigers were killed in the first quarter of 2016 than in any entire year since 2001. Few people realize that less than 4,000 tigers remain in the wild. Just for context, there were more than 100,000 tigers at the turn of the 20th century when Rudyard Kipling wrote The Jungle Book. And park rangers are dying in the line of fire trying to protect these animals, often outgunned by poachers armed with assault weapons and night vision glasses. Wildlife crime ranked low on the priority list for many nations until Prince William helped bring the issue to the world stage in 2012. Today, there is growing global attention and action, including a call for fast-track solutions from the UN Environment Program and new enforcement initiatives from Interpol and governments across the globe. Many nations are passing stronger wildlife laws, and of course, there are huge efforts by conservation organizations, wildlife biologists, park guards, government agencies, and individuals. While enforcement is key, experts agree that the only way to save endangered wildlife is by stopping consumer demand. Education and social media campaigns in China have effectively dropped consumption of shark fin soup by at least half, and prompted the government to stop serving the dish at state functions. And we've seen additional progress with President Obama and China's President Xi Jinping forging an agreement to fight the ivory trade, as Jennifer mentioned. But wildlife species that are bred in captivity for commercial purposes make some products widely available, which drives up consumer demand and increases poaching in the wild. Some species are commercially farmed in China, often under extremely poor living conditions. They include bears, which are milked for their bile, and tigers, raised for their pelts and for their bones, which are used in very expensive tiger bone wine. These facilities make absolutely no contribution to conservation. Now, a proposed revision to China's 1989 wildlife law opens more loopholes, expanding the ability to farm endangered species and sell their parts and products in the domestic commercial trade. Grace will tell us more about that shortly. Let me finish with a recent statement by Prince William, made in March when he enlisted 40 shipping firms, airlines, and customs agents to help crack down on illegal wildlife trafficking routes. He said, "Everyone agrees that losing these animals from the wild would be a disaster for humanity. This means that halting this crisis is only a test of our will. The question is, can we be bothered to do our bit?" So let's now turn to our panelists, who are among the world's top experts on wildlife trade, each with decades of on-the-ground and policy experience, to allow them to further frame the issue and discuss the way forward. Jennifer will introduce them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No, thank you so much. I mean, there's really sobering, scary, sad statistics with beautiful, some beautiful images behind you. Thanks for having the pangolins up there, by the way. Yeah, so I'm going to introduce the panel, because you came to hear Sharon and the panelists. And so, Grace Gabriel from International Fund for Animal Welfare, you came early on, like 15 years ago, to one of my meetings. I'm so glad you finally came back. But now you've come back as the regional director for IFA's Asia office. And since 1997, Grace has been the boots on the ground and has been really starting new kinds of conversations and new kinds of policies in China that have been making positive change. I have to note, she told me right beforehand, those of you who were early saw that we had some of their public service announcements, and one showed them putting up these giant posters in the Beijing airport. Who's seen those posters in the Beijing airport? Anyone here? No, you guys are not hanging out in like the world's one of the largest airports. Anyway, they've got these big posters in the Beijing airport and other places in Beijing, and you guys were listed as one of the top 20 brands in China now. Kentucky Fried Chicken is number 1. IFA's number 20. And they're the only nonprofit organization that made the list. That shows that, that you've been in China building this trust and trying to turn the tide on animal protection. And so today, she's going to talk to us about some of the positive work that they've been doing, not her and other organizations, as well as what is this new draft law? What does it mean? What are some of the gaps that exist in it? Some of the other work that she's done, she was involved in the founding of the International Tiger Coalition, which was kicked off by our second speaker, Judith Mills. Not only we have a lot of years of experience here, they all know each other. Judith Mills investigated illegal wildlife trade across Asia for Traffic for many years. She was the founding director of Traffic's East Asia office. And most recently, she's the author of Blood of the Tiger, A Story of Conspiracy, Greed, and the Battle to Save a Magnificent Species. You have the bios. I don't like reading them, but as you could probably guess from all that I talked about, she's going to be talking about what's happening with tigers. And many lovely but also sobering images. Last but not least, our closing picture is Alan Thornton, and he's worked for 40 years to protect threatened wildlife, and he's the president of the Environmental Investigation Agency. Just kind of swashbuckling, stealth-like work that tries to uncover the baddies, correct? That's like a totally colloquial way, but that's what you do. Sometimes. And sometimes in his office in Beijing, DC. But notably, I mean, one of the many cases that in Asia they exposed illegal wildlife rhino horn trade that brought sanctions against Taiwan and was really kind of pushing for the commitments from Taiwan and China to stop trading in it. So I'm going to move forward. We're going to have Grace, want to come on up here and start giving you a talk?
Sure.
And now your job, okay, you're not passively sitting by here. I want you to think about some challenging questions to these people. This is a big and complex issue, so you ready? Sure. Let's have some applause for my
Good afternoon. Thank you for the organizers for this symposium. And some of you had seen when you came in, the posters and the demand reduction efforts, public awareness initiatives going on in China. But really, I will talk a little bit about those, but we feel that that's not far from enough. Reducing demand alone is not enough to stop wildlife trade. To save wildlife species, we really have to work on every link on that trade chain, from poaching to trafficking to demand. China was listed as the Gang of Eight by CITES, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, for its role as the largest consuming country for elephant ivory from illegally traded, poached elephants. And ivory carving has long been a traditional skill in Chinese culture. Intricately carved ivory was always a symbol of stature, power, and wealth. And this ivory carving was a gift China gave to the UN Assembly in the 70s. It depicts the Chengdu-Kunming Railway. And this carving was displayed at the New York UN Assembly for many, many years. And it was in the last few years, it was taken away. But ivory carving was a purview of a privileged few in the past. The economic, the dramatic increase in consuming power because of the economic growth had really given rise to a demand. Many people, a demand for many luxury products, including elephant ivory. The demand for ivory in China exploded in 2007. When China was allowed to be the trading partner of ivory from 4 southern African countries. China bought 62 tons of ivory. It was a CITES-approved sale, and many people who didn't have ivory or didn't even know about ivory all of a sudden saw people around them having ivory. Not only having ivory is touted. This was a CCTV program, and it was about art investment, and it talked about ivory prices had tripled, and it's touted as white gold. And many people, it was touted as white gold for not only for decorating, for investing, for speculating, for gift giving, for doing business or corrupt officials as gifts, and as also as a new fashion must-have. And this was after 2007 when China opened the ivory market again. And to become an ivory trading partner, China had to set up an ivory registration system. And that system requires that every ivory carving factory and retail outlet have to have a government-issued license. And every piece of ivory sold on the market have to have its own certificate, its own ID. And this was a survey IFA did in 2011. We visited 158 ivory carving factories and retail outlets. Out of 158, 101 did not have government-issued license. And of those 57 with government-issued license, 60% of them were selling the ivory without the ID card. We found the ID card had become a commodity in and of itself. And also, what we found is between 2006 and 2011, ivory in Chinese currency tripled. The price in Chinese currency tripled. But during those 5-6 years, Chinese currency gained value against the US dollar. So for every Chinese going overseas where they can source illegal ivory, their Chinese currency can go so much further. And if they buy ivory and smuggle it back into the country and sold on the market, the profit margin is extremely high. And seizures of large-scale ivory from illegal trade escalated around the world. And during those years, between 2010 to 2012, 100,000 elephants were killed during those 3 years. And then there was a seizure in China by China Customs of an ivory carver. He has his own government licensed ivory carving operation in Fuzhou. And under that operation, under that legal license, he led a smuggling ring, was responsible for smuggling 7.5 tons of ivory from Africa in 2011 alone. And so this legal ivory market not only provides cover for illegal trade, it also removes any stigma from consumers' minds about ivory consumption. Many of them take market availability for legality. And also, many of the, what we saw is the appreciation for the carving skill, the ivory carving skill, which was a cultural heritage, is shifted to appreciating ivory as a material in and of itself. Those seizure, the picture, the last picture, you saw those bracelets and beads. None of them was culture. And then there was also a misunderstanding among Chinese because 70% of the people don't know ivory comes from dead elephants, because in Chinese, ivory is 象牙, 象 elephant, 牙 teeth. So people think when it's teeth, a person's teeth can fall off, people don't die. It is a true misconception. And Chinese language has another huge misconception for conservation, is the word for animals. Animals is 动物. 动 is moving. 物 is an object. And that misconception about animals, combined with social, cultural, economic, political conditions really makes China a hotbed for commercial exploitation of wildlife, of animals in general. And I want to specifically talk about the political conditions. China has a wildlife protection law. Today's topic is wildlife laws. This law, even though it's called wildlife protection law, in its preamble, there is no mention of protecting species. What is the goal of protecting species? Is for its ecological function, is for nature. No, the law is set up to protect these species because they have cultural, economic value. So that means this law completely regards animals, wildlife, even highly endangered species, as something that can be commercially traded. If we protect them, then we can use them and trade them. And this is, under this law, many of the species, tigers, rhinos, China used to have tigers and rhinos, and China's rhino horn and tiger bone had traditionally been used in traditional Chinese medicine. And because of their trade was so high, the volume was so high, it's impacting tiger populations all over the world. So in 1993, China's state council banned the use of tiger bone and rhino horn in traditional Chinese medicine. And that ban was very impactful. After the ban, Chinese government removed tiger bone and rhino horn from the official pharmacopoeia, and it also removed them from the school curriculums, TCM school curriculums, and increased the protection measures and sought alternatives to replace them. And that was credited partly for the recovery of tiger populations in the Russia Far East. I know Judy is going to talk more about tigers, but under that law, under China's wildlife law, even though the state council banned the use of tiger bone and rhino horn from traditional medicine use, that law allows industrialized farms to operate, and their purpose is solely for trade. This was a tiger carcass. It was in an underground cellar of one of those tiger farms, and there are hundreds of huge vats, each containing a tiger carcass. And it's soaked in liquor. The tiger carcass is soaked in liquor to produce. The liquor then is put into these tiger-shaped bottles and sold as nurturing bone wine. And so is bears. Several speakers Sharon has already talked about bears. Bears are put in these tiny cages for years, for decades, in order to tap their bile. And their bile is used for tonics, for eye drops, for tea, and even for toothpaste and shampoo. And then in China, actually more than half of China's entire population now have internet access. E-commerce was increasing and reaching 688 million netizens 24/7. And so all these are impacting species conservation. So what can we do about it? So this is IFAW's campaign in China have always focused not only just on reducing demand. Our focus is to reduce trade, period. Reduce both supply, market supply, and consumer demand. And the three pillars of our campaign include public outreach, policy advocacy, and society mobilization. I'll talk about each of them. To reduce market supply, we worked with internet e-commerce giants Alibaba and Taobao since 2005 to urge them to make their marketplaces unavailable for wildlife trade. So in 2008, Alibaba and Taobao banned the trade of tiger bone, rhino horn, bear bow, pangolin scale, elephant ivory, including and even shark fin in 2009. And after they're banned, we provide them with a list of the names of these animal parts and products, and anybody try to sell them online, they would be blocked. And then after led by Alibaba and Taobao, many other online companies, including some of these are collections, antique websites, start banning wildlife trade, including last year, together with TNC, we work with Tencent. Tencent is China's largest social media website owner. It's WeChat and QQ. And also, some of these search engines, Sogou, if you type in Ivory in Chinese on this search engine, it will have a pop-up telling you ivory is, elephants are protected and urge people not to buy ivory.
And it's your poster.
Yes, yeah. And this is bi-monthly monitoring shows that the ivory, by making marketplaces unavailable for trade, was able to have a sustained reduction of wildlife traded online. And then this was an interesting story. At the end of 2011, December, we saw an auction house was going to sell off 400 bottles of tiger bone wine in a hotel just close to our office. So during lunch break, we just walked over to look at the preview. They not only have tiger bone wine, they have ivory and rhino horn carvings. We provided the information to law enforcement. They shut down that auction, and then they also issued a ban of auction of ivory, rhino horn, and tiger bone. And this notice was issued to China's Auction Association. And immediately, at the end of December and the beginning of 2012, we saw many of these auctions were taking these products off the shelves. And this resulted in 2012 resulted in a 40% reduction of China's overall auction volume in that year. 40% represented $322 million worth of endangered species didn't get auctioned off. And then a research by a Yale researcher, he only took the ivory from the auction, and he saw that in 2012, ivory auction dropped by 90%. And that coincided with a dip in elephant poaching as well. And he compared it with pike data. And what other methods to use to stigmatize ivory consumption and trade? By destroying it. When the U.S. government destroyed 6 tons of ivory in Denver, less than 2 months later, China destroyed 6.1 ton of ivory. And remember, 70% of the Chinese do not know ivory comes from dead elephants. And based on that, this was our initial public awareness raising campaign. It's called Mom, I Have Teeth. It's a dialogue the baby is having with mother, and the baby was saying, Mom, very excitedly, happy, like any baby, saying, Mom, Mom, I have teeth now. And the mother is not answering, and the baby says, Mom, aren't you happy I have teeth? And then we tell them what it means for elephant families and urge people do not buy ivory. When we send this out to ad agencies, many of them come back and say, we want to put this across the country. And they did. They put it all over the country. And including Education Bureau official took a picture of it and put it in China's college entrance exam as a language test. You get 5 points for answering the question correctly. And that reached 9 million college applicants. And after 4 years of running the Mom, I Have Teeth campaign, we tested it and found that the ad penetrated 75% of urban China and reduced the group with the most propensity to purchase ivory from 54% to 26%.
Good job.
Thank you. And in addition to pulling on people's heartstrings, we also use, how many people here speak Chinese?
You got a good crowd.
Great, great. So you know, elephant supposed to have tusks here, and tiger supposed to have a bone here, and the word for bear is supposed to have its gallbladder here, and the word for people supposed to have another leg here. But we took these out and we say, if we mutilate animals this way, aren't we just beings without humanity? And this was another of our ad. And this ad was also interesting. It was developed by IFA's Middle East office and ran in Dubai International Airport. When it ran there, it could say, ivory trafficking leads to prosecution. But in China, there is a legal market. We can't say, trading leads to prosecution. What we have done is the word in here is 有形, it means having status, and the word in the handcuff is 有形, having sentence. So there is a possibility engaging in ivory trade to get you in trouble. And then our campaign attracted so many influencers, from different social sectors. When they heard about our campaign and we want them to help us influence society, we felt that our voice alone is not enough. And many of them coming, from business, from art, from entertainment, and here is Wang Shi, business leader, and including these two guys who run shows in China. They are both antique dealers. They run a show similar to Antique Roadshow here. And when they heard that we are looking for key opinion leaders, they came to us asking to help us be our voice. And here is one of the PSAs by one of the guys. Should we
Do you
run
want to
it,
show it,
or
or do you want to?
do I have time?
Do you guys want to see the PSA? All right, AV people, I told you not to show it. Could you show it for us? See if I get a wave over there. We were kind of, right before, those of you who were timely got to see a whole bunch of PSAs at the beginning of the meeting. But they'll run it for us in a second.
Okay.
Yeah, here we go.
"对于喜欢收藏的人，最高兴的莫过于找到自己最心爱的宝贝。对于宝贝，藏家应该取之有道。象牙制品对于你只是手中的一件把件，但是它却是夺取大象生命得来的。人不需要象牙，只有大象需要。请不要抢走大象的宝贝。"
Thank you.
Okay, that was it. It was short and sweet.
And also including, probably many of you recognize her, Li Yuchun. She's China's pop icon. and and
No, I
she
don't
was
recognize
one
her.
of our key opinion leaders, and all of them. They are asking individuals do not buy ivory. They're asking government to shut down ivory trade, and they're asking artists do not use ivory in carvings. And many of they're influencing their friends, families, peers, and millions of fans. But also we have key opinion leaders who are politicians themselves. And this is Mr. Yuan Xikun. He is UNEP ambassador. He's an artist himself. He's also a CPPCC China political what was it? People's Political Consultative Committee member. So he has been submitting proposals into the legislature asking China to shut down tiger farms, to shut down ivory trade, asking government to asking President Xi to include the consumption of endangered species in his anti-corruption campaign because they feed decadence and they feed corruption. And so there have been a lot of impacts, I think, in the last few years, at least on the elephant issue. Increased political will, including reinterpretation of China's criminal law. One clause in the criminal law is knowingly consume endangered species is a prosecutable crime. And also, anti-corruption campaign had shut down shark fin consumption. And also, President Xi and President Obama's joint pledge. And today, actually, President Obama's ivory trade ban came into effect. And it's wonderful news. It's a preamble for next week's Sino-U.S. strategic and economic dialogue. I know it's going to be on the agenda. But and also, of course, marketplaces have joined our campaign, shutting them down. Not only shutting them down, all the ad space that we ran in China, for instance, since 2000, at the end of 2014 to January 2016, in 16 months, our ad campaign generated $40 million worth in kind, all coming from Chinese companies joining the campaign, helping us put the posters out. And that's why we became the number 20th brand. However, there are also some things that are really precarious. And one of them is the President Xi's pledged trade banning commercial trade for ivory in China. It's still not implemented. There is no timeline. There is no method to implement it. We know law enforcement agencies and officers all want that ban because it's going to make their job a lot easier when the ban comes into effect. But that hasn't happened. But even more precarious is China's revision of China's wildlife protection law. Unfortunately, this revision is going to make the law even more utilization focused and giving industrialized farming of highly endangered species for commercial trade a green light. So we feel that in China, if we want to just reduce demand, is far from enough. We need strong and clear, unambiguous laws making wildlife trade illegal, in all circumstances, combined with vigorous enforcement and meaningful penalties. And all that will help stigmatize wildlife consumption. And only by doing that can we reduce wildlife trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So you guys got the big picture now, right? Well, now we're going to hone on in. We're going to look at tigers. Oh, you actually might want to slip over again. She's doing tigers. Sorry. Hey, Judy.
I am. I'm not sure how to use this little guy, though. I think I know, though. I think I can figure it out.
Just go ahead and start talking.
Okay, well, firstly, thank you, everyone, for being here. It's great to see you. And thank you also, Wilson Center, in particular, Sharon Geinup and Jennifer Turner, for inviting me to join this couple of my heroes at the podium here. And I would also like to begin by thanking Steve Winter, a National Geographic photographer who is not here today, but some of his photos are among my slides. And you'll know them when you see them because they'll take your breath away.
Sorry, just start talking and I'll flick it by hand.
I would really like that first slide.
Sorry. I think it's under view. It's weird. Okay, thank you. I do poorly in.
And Judy?
Okay,
Yes.
help me out there in the
Oh,
audience.
sorry. Yes, there we go. I usually have such a loud voice that I try to avoid the microphone. How does this, there we go. Okay, so I went to China for the first time in 1991 to investigate bear farming for traffic. I had hoped to be the first foreigner to see bears milked of their bile for use in traditional Chinese medicine. It was very new back then. I will never forget when my main government minder turned to me and told me that China already had thousands of bears on farms, and that it intended to farm bears and dozens of other endangered species, just like cows and pigs. Those are his words, just like cows and pigs. Now, to prevent me from becoming the first foreigner to see China's bear bile milking methods, my hosts took me on a trip around northeast China through the countryside not far from the Russian border. One of our distractions along the way was to stop at a secluded fur farm. There, among the hundreds of battery cages filled with mink and raccoon dogs, we saw a handful of tigers in rusty, old-school zoo cages. The farm staff proudly took me to the office and showed me a handwritten ledger that was filling up with orders for tiger bone from traditional Chinese medicine manufacturers. As it turned out, this was China's first tiger farm startup, which was begun, by the way, with 5 zoo tigers shipped from the United States. This is one of those tigers. I'm going to talk today about the genesis of these farms and what it will take to deter vested interests in China and other places in Asia from turning the world's most revered and rare wild species into livestock. Now, that may sound far-fetched to you, but that is what they intend to do, and they're very persistent and very patient. I'm also going to talk to you about why farming of rhinos and tigers and bears and other endangered species will not save them in the wild. Now, there were less than 100 tigers in farms when I visited that fur farm back in 1991. Experts estimated that there may have been more than 7,000 tigers left in the wilds of Asia at that time. A couple years later, the IUCN Cat Specialist Group declared that China's demand for bones from tigers to make traditional Chinese medicine had surpassed the skin trade as the #1 threat to the survival of wild tigers. This was all happening at the same time there was a wholesale slaughter of both Asian and African rhinos for their horns. Under international pressure, including threats of trade sanctions from the Clinton administration, China banned trade in tiger bone and rhino horn in 1993, as Grace said. Both items were removed from the official pharmacopoeia, and all legal manufacturing of medicines containing these 2 items ceased. The traditional Chinese medicine industry was not happy about the ban in 1993. By then, I was stationed in Hong Kong, and I did a lot of work with them. And among their complaints was the fact that they had used these two items as medicines for centuries. And they wanted to know why they couldn't continue to do so. They said, China is a vast country. It will always have enough of these animals for us to use them. By the late 1990s, the traditional Chinese medicine industry began to see the business case for respecting this ban. Mainstream practitioners wanted to sell traditional Chinese medicine to the world, and they did not want it blamed for the extinction of wild rhinos and tigers because they knew that would hinder their goal. Now, despite traditional Chinese medicine's buy-in, by 2005, there were thousands of tigers on farms in China, at least one with a winery that was paid for with money from China's State Forestry Administration. In 2007, there were 5,000 tigers on China's farms, and about 5,000 tigers left in the wild. That was the year the State Forestry Administration announced that it was considering reopening China's tiger trade. That was also the year that the parties to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES, formally decided that tigers should not be farmed for selling their parts and products. Unfortunately, the State Forestry Administration ignored that decision and announced in 2010 that there were as many as 6,000 tigers on China's farms, nearly twice the 3,200 tigers that were estimated to be left in the wild. This is the entrance to a tiger and bear farm in China. This is one of that farm's public entertainment offerings. As you can see, it's a circus made up of tigers. And this is the backside of that tiger farm. This is the part the public doesn't see. Today's tiger farms are basically feedlots where tigers are bred like cattle to make luxury products, including tiger bone wine and tiger skin rugs. This trade is about wealth. It is not about health. The mainstream traditional Chinese medicine community no longer wants or needs tiger bone. Polls have repeatedly shown that majorities of people in China support bans on tiger bone, rhino horn, and ivory. China's trade in tiger parts is about a handful of investors planning to get very rich selling high-status products. The main problem with tiger farming, and it's not just an animal welfare issue, the main problem is that it stimulates demand for tiger products. It counteracts demand reduction efforts like IFA undertakes and drives poaching of wild tigers because the bones of wild tigers are considered superior to and exponentially more valuable than the bones of farm tigers. When you think of tiger bone from farms, think of cubic zirconia, you know, fake diamonds. Oh. Think of tiger bone from the wild as natural, flawless diamonds. These are parallel markets. Massive supply in one will not satisfy demand in the other. Some consumers, as Grace pointed out, are now buying tiger bone, rhino horn, and ivory as investment assets, just as they would buy rare art. They are basically banking on extinction. I'm sad to report that poaching of wild tigers has skyrocketed this year. 62 of India's tigers have died of unnatural causes already in 2016, more than twice the 25 killed in all of last year. A new paper published this March in the journal PLOS ONE details a study by Chinese researchers who have found that consumers in China continue to prefer wild-sourced medicinal products over farm-raised because they believe the wild are more effective. Another new paper published in Global Ecology and Conservation by an Australian scientist concluded, and I quote, "For many species, commercial breeding and legalized trade in farm products will have the opposite effect to what is desired for conservation. The main reasons are consumers' preference for wild products and the laundering of illegal products into the illegal wildlife trade. Laundering of illegal products into the legal trade. It is nearly impossible without laboratory analysis to tell the difference between a farmed tiger bone and a bone from a wild tiger." So why is China's State Forestry Administration openly pushing for a full reopening of domestic trade in tiger bone and rhino horn while fighting to keep the ivory trade open? Why are they doing this when limited legal trade in ivory, as Grace mentioned, set off the current unlimited slaughter of African elephants, and bear farming has not stopped the poaching of wild bears for their gallbladders? Some of the answers can be found in China's wildlife protection law. When the wildlife protection law debuted in the 1980s, it not only mandated the farming and consumption of wildlife, but deemed the endeavor virtuous and of great benefit to the People's Republic of China. This mandate grew from Mao Zedong's emphasis on animal husbandry as a cornerstone to the success of communist China. Mao's regime even ordered the People's Liberation Army get involved in the business of animal husbandry and also in medicine manufacturing. What could be more virtuous than animal husbandry to restore the health of China's people? Scholars have noted that China's decision to join CITES in 1981 was not popular with the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Cooperation, the Ministry of Public Health, and the People's Liberation Army. In fact, the People's Liberation Army was implicated in protecting the smugglers of tiger bone and rhino horn after China banned their importation to comply with CITES. The People's Liberation Army, several government ministries, pharmaceutical manufacturers, as well as provincial and municipal governments invested much money and manpower in starting China's now established tiger and bear farming industries, the country's new rhino horn farming industry, yes, they're farming rhinos now for their horns, and unsuccessful attempts to farm musk deer and pangolins. Another key player was China's Northeast Forestry University, which until recently produced all of the country's biologists, and some of those graduates now hold powerful leadership positions in today's State Forestry Administration. Much financial, professional, and political capital has been invested in this uniquely Chinese approach to conservation. Some advocates have financial stakes in the outcome, and others are simply true believers, despite all the warnings and pushback from the international conservation community. The only way to stop this growing trend toward the commodification of tigers, rhinos, bears, and dozens of other wild species is to take the matter out of the hands of those married to these mandates from the past, which, like the unmitigated burning of fossil fuels, are proving dangerous to Earth as we know and love it. This is how the world achieved game change on climate change. President Obama spoke directly about the issue with China's President Xi Jinping. The United States acknowledged it had a problem with greenhouse gas emissions too. And that led to the number 1 and number 2 greenhouse gas emitters, China and the United States respectively, jointly pledging to limit their climate impacts and to lead the world to do the same. China is widely celebrated for this decision. But it's not easy for the central government to convince old school local authorities to wean their economies from production of climate warming coal and to choose clean solar and wind power over coal-fired electricity. Something similar, of course, happened with ivory. Prince William raised concerns about China's consumption of ivory directly with Xi Jinping in a personal meeting. The United States acknowledged that it too had a problem. Both countries burned some of their ivory stockpiles. Then China and the United States, the world's #1 and #2 consumers of wildlife, respectively, made a joint pledge to stop ivory trafficking at home and abroad and to ban domestic ivory trade. Again, there is resistance from old school cadres in China, but Xi Jinping has stubborn resolve. There are 3 things I think have to happen in order to stop the commodification of rhinos, tigers, and other endangered species. Firstly, the matter must go above those with vested interests in farming endangered species for consumption. Secondly, the United States must admit that it too has a problem, which it has done with ivory and to some extent rhino horn, but we also have 5,000 or more captive tigers of our own here. Many are in commercial trade, such as cub petting. No one knows how many there are, where they all are, or what happens to their skins and bones when they die. The State Forestry Administration in China uses U.S. tigers as a reason why China should not hold back on farming tigers and legalizing domestic trade in their parts and products. Finally, China and the U.S., the world's #1 and 2 consumers of wildlife, must negotiate a bilateral agreement like their climate and ivory agreements. I believe nothing less than a mandate from the very top of government will stop the enduring and expanding effort to commodify tigers and a long list of other endangered species. I personally don't want to live in a world where rhinos, tigers, bears, and other endangered species are just like cows and pigs. But neither does the majority in China, according to repeated polling, to Chinese social media, celebrities, politicians, Chinese NGOs, and many more beginning to speak up every day. This is not a matter of East versus West. As with climate change, this is a matter of taking a stand together for protecting our planet's well-being and natural history. And I will leave you with the words from the joint China-US climate statement of November 2014. The seriousness of this challenge calls upon the 2 sides to work constructively together for the common good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's exciting again to see this jettison up to a top U.S.-China area of cooperation. All right, it's you, Alan. You just tell me when you want me to hit the presentation.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Jennifer and Sharon and the Wilson Center for your kind invitation for us to speak here today. And we're honored to be here. The Environmental Investigation Agency seeks to protect the environment with intelligence. And what we mean by that is that we do undercover investigations to gather evidence that documents the key players in the destruction and abuses that threaten the natural environment. And our main areas of interest have been wildlife, forests, the global climate, and the ozone layer. And one of the key focal points of our wildlife work has been in the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, which has framed and influenced the policies of the government of China in both good and bad ways. The available evidence shows that when CITES makes precautionary decisions, that is, to protect endangered species, whether by resolutions or listing species on CITES Appendix 1, that prohibits trade in their products, international trade in their products, the outcome can be very positive, both in China and outside of China. When CITES policies and decisions have promoted trade in products from endangered species, such as the African elephant, the outcomes have been disastrous. China's farming of wild animals, such as tigers, bears, and more recently rhinos, has not provided any conservation benefit to these species and is a strong negative force in helping to stimulate demand for products derived from these species. CITES alone has not been sufficient to promote or secure policies that result in effective wildlife protection in China, as well as many other nations around the world. As Grace showed, it's taken extensive work by non-governmental groups to amass evidence and to promote governmental and intergovernmental initiatives and policies to mobilize public opinion and enact national policies that have influenced outcomes in China and internationally over the past 25 years. Some 4 years ago, Secretary Clinton initiated a U.S. program against wildlife trafficking. This led to what is possibly the most important development in recent years, which was President Obama's executive order on combating wildlife trafficking in July 2013, which has mobilized the extensive resources of the U.S. government to balance CITES actions, including the disastrous decision to dismantle the 1989 ban on ivory trade in 1997 by allowing Japan to legally import ivory from southern African countries. Again, in 2008, CITES allowed China and Japan to buy legal ivory from southern Africa, triggering spectacular, uncontrollable demand for poached ivory that has devastated elephant populations across Africa. The truth is that CITES is really not very well set up to manage and control international trade in endangered species. It has worked best when it puts forward precautionary policies. And we continue to see this in a whole variety of species. But going back to China, let's look at what happened in the past with rhinos and elephants. In the early 1990s, the last rhino poaching crisis had erupted. Both China and Taiwan were at the center of the international trade in poached rhino horn. Now, North Korean embassy officials in both Zambia and Zimbabwe were known to be prime movers of poached rhino horn out of Africa that was smuggled in diplomatic bags and eventually transited to Guangzhou in China and sold onto the Chinese market. But in 1987, CITES had agreed a resolution, Conf Resolution 6.10, that called for CITES parties to ban domestic rhino horn trade to counter ongoing rhino poaching. By 1992, EIA noted that none of the major consumers of poached rhino horn were taking action to close their markets to rhino horn. And we decided to try to enforce the CITES Resolution 6.10. So in November 1992 in London, we launched a particularly aggressive new campaign targeting Taiwan, where pharmacies brazenly displayed all around the island, openly displayed rhino horns and tiger heads and skins for sale. We called for international trade sanctions by the United States and European Union nations against Taiwan, and for public boycotts of Taiwan's highly noted manufactured goods in the electronic and sports goods segments. 3 days after our campaign launched, the president of Taiwan announced a domestic ban on rhino horn trade. But it would take U.S. trade sanctions imposed by President Bill Clinton in 1994 to cause a real crackdown on the Taiwanese rhino horn market. EIA had identified a Taiwanese syndicate that had bought up 6 tons of rhino horn from Taiwan, Korea, and Japan, and moved the horns onto the Chinese mainland to sell to Chinese government-owned pharmaceutical industries. And our investigators tracked a ton of this poached rhino horn to southern China and posing as potential buyers, obtained undercover footage of the largest amount of illegal rhino horn ever filmed. That's it.
It's a silent video.
Yes.
He's going to talk.
So the horn in this little warehouse in southern China, the poached rhino horn, was more than all the rhino horns left on live Zimbabwe elephants extant at that time in the country. And one of the syndicate people that arranged the unpacking of this ton of rhino horn said to us that, said to our undercover investigators that if you want to move it up to Hong Kong, we can get the military police to deliver it up there, sort of waving his fingers as guns. And this footage, this video footage, was shown all over the world on TV news back then, when TV news covered items in more than a 40-second blurb. But it was shown by ABC TV here in the US, one of the top items. It was shown on Viz News around the world and across Europe. And we were allowed to show this video at the Standing Committee meeting, Standing Committee of CITES, which is like the governing body of the convention, at the meeting in Brussels in 1993. And just as we were about to show the video, the door opened and Secretary Babbitt, Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt, came into the room. And oddly, his chair, his seat was literally right next to the Chinese delegation. Secretary Babbitt had been a very strong supporter of measures to protect rhinos and tigers. And he had personally endorsed the use of trade sanctions to help protect those species. So, as you'd already heard, in May 1993, China's State Council issued a directive banning domestic sale of rhino horn and tiger bone in China. And over the next year, both EIA and other NGOs, as well as the U.S. State Department, monitored the availability of rhino horn in China, including in their consuls in more remote areas. And we found, and other NGOs also found, that rhino horn did disappear from the market. Other organizations also found in subsequent surveys that almost all of the tiger bone products were also removed from market. The Chinese government even arranged a public burning of 265 kilograms of the seized rhino horns, and it was broadcast on Chinese state TV, apparently reaching some 300 million viewers, with both the Secretary General of CITES and the Chairman of the CITES Standing Committee in attendance. And that sent out a very powerful message all over the world. In tandem with the crackdown by Taiwan, this had an enormous impact in driving down the demand for rhino horn. Now, this was the first major Chinese government action to adopt a far-reaching precautionary policy towards endangered rhinos and tigers by closing the domestic market to the trade in horn and tiger bone, effectively undercutting global demand and prices paid for rhino horn. Now, substantial declines in poaching were reported by rhino states. So China had, in effect, helped to cause the greatest turnaround in the history for the world's rhinos. By 1995, a friend of mine in WWF US told me that rhino populations had stabilized worldwide, some at very low levels, but stabilized all the same. And rhinos were again safe for over a dozen more years until controls broke down in South Africa by 2007, when a new rhino poaching crisis erupted. Sadly, in the intervening years, while we were out chasing the rhino horn traders and trying to get China and Taiwan to stop selling rhino horn, South Africa led efforts to kill off CITES Resolution 6.10. that called for domestic bans on rhino horn trade as part of South Africa's long-term strategy to legalize the rhino horn trade. Although the Chinese State Council banned trade in tiger bone, which at the time was the most lucrative product of the time, other tiger products were not specified. Generally, as you've already heard, the law has encouraged commercial breeding of wild animals for commercial purposes in China. So what about some more history of the ivory trade in China? So when the 1989 CITES ban caused the closure of world markets in Europe, the United States, and Japan, and elsewhere, this caused a global collapse of the ivory trade and ivory demand literally within months. Poaching declined by more than 90% in Kenya the year after the ban, and similar results were noted across Africa. The number of poached animals in Kenya went down from over 2,000 the year before the ban to just over 100 the year after the ban. Elephant populations began to repopulate across much of Africa, and EIA had friends, colleagues, contacts in many African elephant range states across Africa, and we kept getting these joyous messages from everyone saying, there's elephant babies everywhere, there's babies, all the elephants are coming back. And another really important thing about it is that many of the African nations were starting to build and develop their tourism industry based on wildlife tourism. In Tanzania, one of the country that EIA worked closely with when they proposed the Appendix 1 listing for all African elephants in 1992, reported back to CITES that they had earned $20 million from wildlife tourism in the year before. In the last couple of years, Tanzania has reported earning over $1 billion from tourism. And a USAID report last year estimated that over 1 million jobs were directly or indirectly created from wildlife tourism in Tanzania. And most of those were in rural areas where employment was much needed. So EIA had undertaken 2 years of undercover investigations into the global ivory trade leading up to the 1989 CITES ivory ban. And some of the things we found out then were going to have an impact on what subsequently unfolded in China. We identified 3 major Chinese-led syndicates based in Hong Kong that dominated the global trade in poached ivory. Back then, Hong Kong was still a British-controlled territory and filed a 6-month exemption to the CITES ivory ban and stated that they held 600 tons of ivory stocks in 1989, which created a major loophole that has persisted to this day and that China inherited when its sovereignty passed back to China in 1997. We tracked the Poon Syndicate to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, where they had set up carving factories in Dubai's Jebel Ali Free Zone. And the reason I want to point this out is to show the extent that these criminal syndicates will go to easily evade CITES efforts to control ivory trade and many other major trades in wildlife products. So we found 2 carving factories in the Jebel Ali Free Zone. I'm going to go to the next. And
Can I start it?
yes, you can start it. We gained access to a neighboring warehouse to one of the ivory factories and persuaded the Black & Decker manager there that we wanted to get some artistic shots of his warehouse. So could he please put our cameraman and photographer in that great big cardboard box, put it on a forklift, and go put it at the back of the warehouse on the top shelf so that we get some artistic shots. And they carved the hole in the box, and you can see there those canvas bags are all bags of ivory tusks. The carvers are working the ivory because CITES required permits to export whole tusks at that time. So you see those bags there stacked about this high. Those are all bags of poached ivory. And so you had these 60 carvers coming in every day, working 16-hour shifts, partially carving the ivory to circumvent CITES controls. And the ivory was shipped off to Taiwan, Singapore, Belgium, and several other countries. And at that time, China had a relatively small demand for ivory. They imported 60 tons in 1987 and 50 in 1988 and 18.5 in the first half of 1989. Most of this was used to make work products which were re-exported to other markets, both Hong Kong, the US, Europe, and so on. At that time, Hong Kong's ivory imports were 300 tons a year, and at the time of the ivory ban, 600 tons at 1983. So the Hong Kong ivory trade would have a major effect on developments in China. So Japan at that time was the world's largest importer of poached elephant ivory. And with ivory tusks from 240,000 elephants imported between 1970 and 1989, much of the ivory being laundered through Japan to Hong Kong by the criminal syndicates there. So in 1997, Japan, allied with Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Botswana, succeeded in gaining approval to buy legal ivory by CITES. And in 1999, the first ivory auction went ahead. And we already began to notice from our contacts around Africa that elephant poaching started to tick up. And in less than 8 years, the CITES ivory ban had achieved a massive decline in elephant poaching across almost all of Africa. Illegal ivory trade had plummeted. Elephants began to repopulate across much of their African range, generating increased wildlife-based tourism that supported the economic development of many African elephant range states. So since then, we've had 19 years, almost 19 years, of CITES grappling with the increasingly devastating consequences of its decision to resume the trade. Now, dismantling the total ivory ban, you often hear people say, oh, there's an ivory ban, but really the ban was dismantled, both when Japan had trade and when Japan and China received the second auction of legal ivory trade, because that, in effect, created a massive opportunity to launder illegal ivory under the guise of legal ivory. If you've got a permit for legal ivory trade, you can use it, in the past you could use it over and over to bring in new poached ivory. The same happens on the national level, and we've seen that in China you're supposed to have a permit to sell ivory, but many ivory traders would offer you a 10 or 15% reduction if you didn't need the permit. But for CITES, dismantling the total ivory ban meant shifting from protecting elephants to overseeing, monitoring, and reporting on an ever-increasing and failed effort to control and oversee the ivory trade. I'm going to go to my next slide here. So by 1997, as Grace mentioned, ivory trade was reappearing in China. And the Yu Ya company was one of those that was selling a lot of apparently illegal ivory smuggled into the country to five-star hotels and other places. China then decided, like Japan, that it also wanted to trade ivory. Next one. This is in Dalian, in 2007 in a government friendship store. This is one tusk, a big tusk, selling for $130,000 US dollars. This is another video. In 2010, EIA undercover
完全安全的一
investigators.
套资金呢，基本上就没法活的，这是实话了。
所以大家多多少少都
Can we turn down the volume?
水
It's
星
okay,
呢
you，can
啊，
talk.
这最简
Oh,
单。
yeah,
就
just-
像洋麻将，他们退休完了，他们照样也是每天都玩，没事。成品的话，
没事儿，我就说你说要做多少国家你就做多哈。你估计市场上就是正规渠道和非正规渠道能差多少？能占多少？一半以上应该是非正规渠道吧？非正当渠道这么可以，30%。
So the important thing about that is that these are three separate ivory traders in three separate cities, none of whom knew the others, all giving virtually identical responses to the level of illegal ivory trade. So just going forward, we've already heard about the White House joint declaration between President Xi and President Obama to ban domestic ivory trade. Great picture. Last November, there was a Cotonou Declaration by 22 African nations, important points calling on actions at international and national levels to close domestic ivory markets worldwide. In January, Hong Kong also announced that they would move to ban ivory trade. And as you've also heard, April 27th, the United States formally proposed to CITES a resolution that would close domestic markets by CITES parties to ivory trade. And as Grace mentioned today, the U.S. Ban has actually now come into effect. So some of the questions going forward, when will China close its domestic market to ivory trade? Will it be a permanent ban? What action will China take with existing stocks of ivory? Will China reaffirm its ban on trade in rhino horn? And will China abide by the CITES ban on trading tiger products? So I'm going to end there, and thank you again. And if you have any questions, we'll do our best.
They might ask you these questions. Okay, so Joyce?
I would like to pose the first
Yeah,
question.
let's scooch on over here while Joyce gets the microphone. Yep, okay. And maybe I'll ask the AV guys to turn off the screen so it doesn't blind my, thanks.
This question is for Judy. You've said that the only way we're going to stop commercialization of wildlife is intervention from the highest levels of government. What would that look like?
It would have to look like President Xi Jinping basically mandating it. And I'd love to hear Grace chime in on this, but right now the ministry that is in charge of wildlife protection in China is the ministry that also is promoting the continued farming and consumption of wildlife, basically the commodification of wildlife. And the only person or entity that could really override that would be Xi Jinping and his cabinet, the State Council. And that's why I use the climate and ivory agreements as an example of what can happen. I'm surprised that those two things happened. Every day, I'm surprised and happy about the bilateral agreement on both climate and ivory. But because there is this, not only this investment by the ministry in this whole commodification process, there are also probably billions of dollars now invested, and therefore it would take someone very powerful and a lot of money to turn things around. Great. Would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. And I would also say that a lot of other ministries in China that ministries that don't have, not only ministries that don't have vested interest in wildlife trade, but ministries that see the condemnation from around the world or see the devastation in Africa or in countries where wildlife were poached. These ministries can also influence the higher level of government.
I have one follow-up question for you, Grace. What will happen if this wildlife law is passed in its current form? What does that look like?
It would actually, I just used one clause in the second revision, clause 29. Basically, it says if the technique for farming endangered species become mature, then these endangered species can be taken off the list of protected endangered species. And
So,
this
so
is
that
it.
means if they figure out how to effectively farm them,
Farm
then they
them.
can farm them, is that correct?
Correct.
And that they're no longer endangered.
Protected.
Correct. So in effect, actually, this is going to be violating CITES.
Yeah.
Not only violating CITES and violating some of China's own laws. The criminal law is an example. In China, many of the both the public sentiment and the policies are going, one way, the better way. For instance, President Xi had encouraged what he called ecological civilization. Mm-hmm. It's for better environment, better protection of nature, for the country, but this law is going everything the opposite.
Here's a question with that law, because I know that over the last 10, 15 years plus, a lot of laws that, that look at an environment, that they open them up for public comment, and a lot of international groups comment. What kind of traffic has been going into, are they opening this for comment still? And I'm sure IFA was first in line making comments.
They did open for comments a few times. However, each time at public meetings, the voices from industry get the podium, so to speak.
So it sounds like that those voices are becoming really well organized.
Very strong.
These
farming industries can say how many people we employ, and that's what the people who are drafting the laws and to be honest, and there are no biologists in the team that drafts the law.
Okay, let's open up to the audience, because remember I did task them to ask some tough questions. So if you raise your hand, I guess Joyce there in the very last row.
Thanks. Didn't the New York Times have an article, I believe it was last year, Xi Jinping was in Tanzania, he loaded up his plane with ivory. This was in the New York Times. It might have been 2014, but it was reported in England and also by the New York Times.
So you want to respond to that? What do you guys?
Do you want to respond? That was an EIA thing.
That was it was you guys's, right?
Yes, that was some of the findings of a report our London office did, and what we had reported was that key ivory dealers within Dar es Salaam that operated in one of the markets there, who were well known as ivory traders, had told our investigators that during a visit by the president of China, that ivory prices more than doubled during the visit. And they also said that ivory was taken back on the presidential plane, but they didn't in any way implicate the president or any of his staff. They travel with sort of large delegations, I guess. this did get an enormous amount of pickup, but it's not something that is new. In fact, we actually held back other information we had from other countries where identical activities had been reported to us, including by brokers who said that they had sold large amounts of ivory that were put onto the plane. So we think it is just a fact that there's a large number of people in the delegation and needs a relatively small number of people to engineer that. But I think it also just shows what we saw over the last 15 years, and as Grace pointed out, with the spectacular increase in value for ivory and the huge increase in the Chinese presence across Africa, there was a gigantic incentive for people from all walks of life from China visiting Africa to engage in illegal ivory trade, whether taking back a couple of tusks and a bunch of bracelets, or a dozen tusks or several dozen tusks. And all of this had a knock-on impact and effect across Africa and many of the African elephant range states. I believe Traffic reported that Chinese citizens had been arrested in something like 24 elephant range states for offenses pertaining to illegal ivory trade. And I think that just shows how wrong CITES got it when they approved China to get legal ivory trade, because even sort of enforcement people within China were kind of signaling that they didn't want to have legal trade because they didn't think it could be controlled. And the sort of facts presented out of the CITES Secretariat at this time as to why legal ivory trade would be good was, and I roughly quote, was that the legal ivory trade to China would drive down prices and flood the market. I mean, 60 tons of ivory was said it was going to drive down demand for ivory in a nation of around 1.5 billion people. And it's so preposterous that you can't even take it seriously. But that was one of the main justifications that was presented to the parties to justify giving China legal ivory trade.
So, oh, you need a mic. Sorry if there's.
So do you trust Xi Jinping when he talks about this ban? I mean,
Excuse me?
do you trust Xi Jinping on the ivory ban?
I believe he has taken a very important step, and we have to recognize the commitment for what it is, which is a historic decision coming from the top leader of China. And we share all the qualms that Grace has expressed earlier, because every day has been torture, literally, for the last, whatever it's been, year and a half. How long is it going to be? How long is it going to be? When you know elephants, the most magnificent animals in the world, terrestrial animals, are still suffering such damage. So we believe the ban will happen. Of course, there's always the middle management factor, people that have a direct interest in maintaining the trade, that have corrupt relationships with traders and all that sort of thing. But we believe it's such a high-profile commitment, and President Xi has the persona of being China's new kind of strongman leader. So we look forward to the day when, hopefully soon, when China will match the development today when the U.S. ban kicked in. So
If that sibling
hopefully
rivalry
soon
keeps going, we could see it next week.
Yeah.
Some other questions out here? I've got one right up front. Sorry, Joyce.
That's okay.
Making her work extra hard. And if you just say your name and affiliation, that's okay.
Oh,
Sorry.
sure. Cynthia Hurst, International Campaign for Tibet. The Dalai Lama expressed distress over Tibetans wearing animal skins, and this led to the burning, very mass burnings of animal skins in Tibet. And Tibetans stopped for a while wearing animal skins, but since Chinese authorities have encouraged, even required, Tibetans to wear animal skins, including tiger skins, to official meetings. So I was wondering if perhaps one of you could comment on that.
Okay. Anyone?
One of us should.
Well, I think many of the key opinion leaders that we use they come from all sectors of society, and we also have religious leader. But if you are, campaigning in China, you need to find the opinion leaders that can help you influence the masses and change their opinion. At the same time, they need to be recognized by the government. So otherwise, your campaign is not going to be as effective.
Yeah. So we're not there yet on that
Yeah.
with the tigers. Anything?
I just wanted to say that did happen, and it's still happening, and people are still being made to wear them. But when we were part of the International Tiger Coalition, which is 42 organizations from around the world asking for an end to tiger farming and trade from all sources, we did bow out from, directly involving the Dalai Lama, just because, as Grace said, it's almost obligatory for the government, the Chinese government, to do the opposite of what the Dalai Lama is asking for. And for the sake of wildlife, we try to stay away from that.
Okay. Some other questions? We got one right here for you, Joyce. How about her first, then we'll go over there.
Thanks so much. My name is Anne Mooney, and I work with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And so this is really fascinating, actually, being on the terrestrial side of things, hearing from you. And one of my questions for you guys is kind of, what's on the next horizon? If you have the poachers and smuggling, so let's assume all of the bans work, where do these guys go? I mean, just in your opinion, where are they headed next on as far as the illegal or illicit smuggling goes? Do you have a gauge on that?
So if China actually does do these bans, what's the next market, I guess? Yeah. Some thoughts?
I would just say that even talk of legalizing trade gets the poaching activity going. There's been talk of allowing limited legal trade in rhino horn from Africa to China and other recipient states. And I believe just talk of that stimulates poaching. And in the same way that the existence of tiger farms promises a legal market will exist. And if a legal market exists, then illegal goods can be laundered into that. And that's why I would advocate, as Alan has, a complete ban, because that's the only thing that removes the ambiguity and the loopholes through which poachers and smugglers can operate. When we have a complete ban, I think we've seen, for a few years anyway, what happens. And, they're driven out of business.
Can I ask real quickly about the pangolins? I know that pangolins they're not supposed to be traded, correct? I mean, I know it used to be that in Southeast Asia that the poachers would load them in trucks and drive them across the border into China. But I've heard, over the years that there's been, because of CITES, there's been a lot better enforcement by the Chinese. And so poachers have become more clever, and they actually kill them on the other side of the border, package them up, call it pork, bring it. I mean, the poachers do come up with clever ways to get around. But anything observation about pangolins? Because
I've written on pangolins a bit, and they are almost completely gone from Asia, and as a result, poachers are now focusing on the African species and poaching, a couple of species of, all species of African pangolins has really skyrocketed. They are, often smuggled among frozen shipments of a facade of fish with pangolin behind, or, in other ways. But there is a very intense trade of pangolin. At one time, it was the most traded mammal in the world for illegal.
Actually, I just realized, do you guys know what a pangolin looks like? Can you tell me what we had a slide picture there, sorry.
It looks kind of like a little armadillo, a combination between an anteater and an armadillo. Cute little scaled thing.
And I've heard that one of the medicinal uses, it's supposed to be for women, who are nursing, brings milk, but there are other uses as well. So it's often eaten.
Pangolin scale was used in traditional Chinese medicine, and also pangolin meat was, consumed. Yes, as Sharon said, because the demand for pangolin has completely wiped out pangolins from China, and then wiped out other, Asian neighbors, and now it's affecting African pangolins. And that's why at the upcoming CITES conference in September, there are going to be pangolin proposals to uplist other pangolin, especially the African pangolin species. And it's led actually U.S. government and Vietnam government, and even on the pangolin issue, the proposal, there are lots of over a dozen countries from Africa and Asia supporting the pangolin proposal.
I don't know if okay, come on over here.
Thanks. My name is Jeremy Young. I'm a journalist. Alan, I wanted to ask you mentioned criminal syndicates involved in trafficking wildlife. I was wondering if you can talk about, are there any particular well-known gangs that are involved, sort of how sophisticated they are, and what the significance is of their involvement in wildlife trafficking?
Well, in the context of South African rhino horn, we know that both Chinese and Vietnamese syndicates are very active in the illegal rhino horn trade. Many people have heard quite detailed information about the Vietnamese role, which has been very prominent since about 2007, 2008, when a senior political official from Vietnam claimed he was cured of his cancer by taking rhino horn. And this was one of the means where the syndicates drove up demand and prices for rhino horn, and this huge new trade to Vietnam. On the quieter side, the Chinese syndicates in South Africa have been more discreet in some ways, but their presence is known. And I believe Wild Aid said about a third of the rhino horn seizures coming out of South Africa are destined for China, which is one of the reasons I remarked that China should we hope they would reaffirm the domestic ban on rhino horns. And the other major factor about those criminal syndicates is that we're seeing an entirely new, absolutely ruthless and horrifically terrifying approach by these syndicates. They are completely ruthless. And what struck us in the last 5 years in South Africa is that so many people in and around rhinos and rhino trade, everyone is afraid because they don't know who they can trust, because the price of rhino horn has gone so high that even a middle-level broker in rhino horn is awash with money. They can buy police, they can buy magistrates, they can buy politicians. So people just don't know who they can trust anymore. And there is this real groundswell within South Africa of so many people wanting to protect the rhinos. It's part of their natural heritage. So this is a whole new development. And the reason I want to focus on China's role historically in the rhino horn trade, because a significant part of that trade can be cut out if China reenacts rigorous enforcement of the ban. South Africa has been allowed to export live rhinos in the last decade, more than the last decade. I believe over 100 have gone to China. And those animals are intended to be farmed the same way as tigers. And we believe that's a very bad development, because These animals are supposed to exist in the ecosystem in which they occur because they're part of the ecosystem that helps to keep it healthy and the balance with all the other animals and so on. So I think we'll hear more about the Chinese syndicates in the coming months leading up to the CITES meeting in South Africa in September.
Because I know that there was The Guardian had an article recently about how that there's been a lot of pressure by these farms in South Africa, and I was thinking, so are these farms being run by the syndicate? I mean, it was really striking to me. I had no idea that they were so big, and it's totally aimed at the Asian market, because you were asking like, well, are there any other major markets it's going towards? I mean, even within the African continent, I'm guessing not.
Well, it appears that it's all going to China or Vietnam. There may be smaller residual markets around, but those are the two real hot consumers at the moment. And the rhino breeders and farmers, they're at least keeping the animals in natural habitats, and the numbers have increased from a few thousand up to 20,000 white rhinos, or I think it's somewhat less now. And that's a good thing to have lots of wild rhinos out in their natural habitat. But there's no need. I mean, they've been able to trade these animals domestically and sell them to other countries that want to repopulate their rhino population. So they were still making pretty good money out of that. Okay. But we believe it would be just another catastrophic blunder if CITES were to legalize rhino horn trade, because the only people that are going to get that horn out of South African government stocks are the criminal syndicates that are currently driving the poaching. Our understanding of the poaching is that there isn't any rhino that is killed on speculation. They are all killed to order. A dealer in Taiwan or China or wherever, they can text someone, I want 50 rhinos, and there it goes. It's no one's killing a rhino horn and keeping it at home waiting that someone's going to come buy it. I mean, it's ordered up. It's that organized. So,
Sharon, do you have a question or comment?
I do, but I'm
Okay,
going to wait for
we got
some final questions here.
Because there's some good questions coming out of this audience.
Thanks. So my name is Nitin. I work upstairs at USAID. So I was wondering how much confidence y'all have. A couple of you mentioned that a majority of people in China are now in favor of a ban on trade in some of these endangered species like rhino and tiger. So I was wondering how much confidence y'all had in those numbers, because polls, the outcomes of polls depend a lot on how the questions are phrased. And it seems to me that if there is in fact a large majority of consumers in China who would be opposed to this kind of trade, that it would undermine the elite market as well. If you only have a few rich people who value it, it wouldn't be as popular. So I'm just curious about that data and where it comes from.
Okay. That's you, Grace. That's your question. It's your surveys.
Yes, actually, I'll talk about this from two sides. One is the surveys. IFAW, National Geographic, and WildAid, we have all done surveys, and all our surveys, when we ask people, even asked current ivory buyers, and we asked them, what would make you not buy ivory in the future? And the answer that got the highest number is if government make ivory buying illegal in all circumstances. And our interpretation of that doesn't mean that all Chinese citizens are law-abiding citizens, and if government ban, then I'm not going to buy. What our interpretation is, these people see ivory buying really has a lot of connection with corruption, with decadence, with something that people don't like. A lot of people felt if these government officials, if government order can stop them from buying, I have no use of buying ivory. I have no use of this wildlife products. And so this is why our strategy has been focusing on making the connection between the consumption of endangered species with decadence, with corruption. And there are actually evidence to show that as well. And from the other angle is when government banned the ivory, rhino horn, tiger bone from auction, and the drop in that I have already read about in the collection or antique collection circle. People bought ivory at the highest price, and they felt it was white gold, so it will continue to go up. And then all of a sudden, market, tanked and price dropped, and they felt stuck. They felt, oh my God, I thought this is a good investment, but it's not. And so this is exactly where we want people to feel.
Hurt the wallets.
Yes.
Let's got some other questions here. All right. Sorry, you have to be more forceful as you thrust that hand up. Sorry, we got only one mic handler here today. Why don't you pass it down the row? We can have some cooperation and collaboration out in the audience.
Yes, hi. First of all, thank you for all the presentations. This has been very interesting. My name is Lina Scott from Forest Trends, and I'm just wondering on a slightly different subject if any of you would have a comment on the illegal timber trade in China and its role there. I'm thinking perhaps if there are similarities with the wildlife trade, whether the two issues you see the same actors or whether you can have some of the same solutions. Perhaps one topic would be from the consumer demand side, some of those awareness campaigns that have had impact on shark fin and ivory. Are there lessons to be learned there that can be applied to changing the demand in China for high-value timber?
Well, I can say
We're all looking at you, Alan.
I could say something about illegal timber because we've worked on it for quite some years, including in China, both from our Washington and London offices. And interestingly, I was going to show another clip, but since it didn't have enough time, the investigation we did in Fujian, which is a coastal province, where there are 7 or 8 major ivory traders. And we had a lot of different comments from them, but some of the traders also trade in rosewood, which currently is the most valuable wood in the world today. Particularly because of the large amounts that were coming out of Madagascar and the influence of the criminal syndicates there that basically helped to overthrow the sitting president and put a new president in. And there's supposed to be something in the order of $1 billion worth of rosewood sitting in Madagascar. And we have also documented large numbers of shipments of that illegal rosewood coming out of Madagascar. We passed most of that information to Interpol, who triggered seizures. And I believe there's about $140 million of that timber, and the vast majority of it was headed either for China or indirectly going through Hong Kong. And basically, EIA has been advocating that countries ban illegal timber. And in fact, we campaigned for 8.5 years here in the United States for the U.S. to ban illegal timber and wood. Because we had previously been working in Indonesia, which had the worst illegal logging problem in the world, like 72% of their cut of 60 million cubic meters of trees every year was illegal. And the Indonesians said they couldn't stop it unless the demand was closed down. It was just too big. And I understand that because I'm Canadian and we have the biggest timber industry in the world. And even a modern industrialized country like Canada, we really can't control. The timber trade is just so powerful. But in any event, in June of 2008, the U.S. Congress amended the Lacey Act, which bans import of any wildlife product taken in violation of the country of origin that it emanated from, to include plants, and which of course meant trees. And since June 2008, it's been illegal to import illegal logs, timber, or wood products taken in violation of other countries' laws. The European Community has enacted a similar, less rigorous regulation, but still very meaningful. And Australia followed suit, although I believe the recent government has been reviewing that. And we've been advocating that to China, which actually has existing both phytosanitary controls on import of timber, as well as controls over the timber and logs that come in for domestic consumption and what just comes in for processing and re-export. So in effect, they already have a system that could be mandated to keep illegal timber out of the country, and we think that would be a great step forward, and that's another one of our goals we hope to achieve in the next few years.
Is there one more question here? Got time for one or two more questions? Oh, there she is. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Casey Kennard, the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center at George Mason. There's been a lot of talk about the role of the Chinese government and affecting demand on kind of the consumer side, but I'm wondering about if anyone can speak to the role of business, and in the Chinese context that's often parastatal, and the business done in range states within Africa, maybe in the timber trade, things like that, where you find false backs on shipping containers that now have ivory in the back, things like that. But what would be the role of government, Xi Jinping, when you're talking about these bans and things and the statements they could make to address it from that side as well, rather than just the buyer, but the big business that goes as part of that?
Well, there was one point when Judy earlier compared with wildlife with China's pledge on climate change, and I was thinking the reason wildlife it's taking so long for wildlife to get to the top is because people see wildlife as it's public. It's nobody has it, so anybody who can catch it, anybody who can use it, and that mentality, unfortunately, permeates society. And in my presentation, I mentioned even the word for animals is moving objects, and that took, there's no emotion. That took animals are sentient beings, all of that out of that discussion. So it's that your question is it's valid, and I think we just need to make sure the highest level of government need to realize that, and even for Xi Jinping, he has many other competing priorities. So that's why corruption is something he wants to crack down. So we are latching on wildlife into corruption, and that's the way to get his attention.
Yeah. Did you have something? I think you do, because a lot of your tiger issues, it's around the commercialization of it.
Right, and I just wanted to say, I really do feel that Xi Jinping is the guy in this situation. I think we have gone to CITES, we have gone to the World Bank, we've gone everywhere we can think of going. There's been a summit of world leaders to talk about this, and I think that again, hearkening back to climate change, I think that Xi Jinping is the guy who can make it happen, can mandate it from the top. But having said that, and I monitor this every day in my real job for the MacArthur Foundation, I watch China, what it's doing on climate change, and despite the central government mandating reduce greenhouse gas emissions, particularly from reduction in use of coal and steel making, it is really difficult for the central government to affect that, because there are vested business interests, and Xi Jinping is a very powerful man because the way the communist government is set up, but he's not omnipotent. So if he were to take this step for wildlife, it would take so much to actually implement it and to influence all the business interests within China and abroad who are connected to this, because, well, with coal, of course, there are billions of dollars involved, but there's still millions of dollars involved in wildlife trade, and I'm just saying that, this is the one thing that can start it, because nothing else seems to be able to, but implementing that mandate would take so much more.
Yeah, but it comes back to the title of our meeting today, Wild Laws, and that really we've got to watch what happens to this. When is the next draft going to be? Do we know in the next wildlife that there's the second draft?
We don't know if there is going to be another draft. And we don't know what's going to happen. Quite often, laws, only in recent years they even allow public comment in drafting laws, but they can just come out and say, here it is, it's done. The recent one of the other laws that just came out was specifically on international NGOs, for instance, just focusing on international NGOs. And there was a comment period, and a lot of people commented, basically moving the agency overseeing international NGOs from the Ministry of Civil Affairs to the police.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like NGOs are regarded as guilty until you're proven innocent. But that law, after comment.
Well, there were a couple of comment periods, and then but then it was just very quietly came out, right?
It came out. It passed.
Yeah.
So like that was my last question. There is this new Chinese law regulating international nonprofits. So how will that affect conservation and the kind of ability to affect change in China?
I think it's actually has much less effect on conservation NGOs than NGOs, on human rights or on other religious issues. But when I was growing up in China, there was a song we learned. It's if you pick up a penny on the side of the street, and who do you give to? You give to the police. And so I see this as almost similar. It's going the same way as if you're doing good deeds and you give it to the police, and the police should look at you, favorably. What we're doing is helping. In fact, we're helping, not only helping China, we're helping the world. And I think, unless when we come into direct conflict with business interest, otherwise we are seen as a good force for change.
And I think actually, we've hit our time, and it's been a very sobering and sometimes depressing presentations from you guys. So I want to leave on a little bit of an optimistic note. There's a lot of work to be done. I really applaud all of you in the kind of work that you've been doing in raising the awareness, opening the door. And I do hope that the new law regulating nonprofits, that it won't have too much of a cooling effect on we're not just IFA, but other folks who are doing work in China. Because ultimately, you guys, we stick people in boxes and film. Clearly, transparency and getting the information out is really crucial for the protection that you guys are all advocating. And so, one more time, applaud these people here. Thank you. And if you're interested in continuing conversations, join us, join our mailing list, because again, we'll have a similar conversation about illegal wildlife trade in the Americas sometime later in the summer. Thank you so much. All right, good job.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Yeah, the box thing totally just took, how big was that box?
It was pretty big.
Okay, good.
There's two grown men in it.
Oh, it had two? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Did they take it? Would be interesting to see, would be a picture of them